Hello and welcome to another Hollywood Wargaming episode of Star Wars Legion, and today we are going to be looking over the training upgrades and how they stack up next to each other. Now, much like the other videos in this ranking series, this will be a sort of living document that will be revisited as time goes on, seeing as new cards, new metas, and new points values will appear in the future. But I am very excited to jump into the training upgrade, as this is one of the more robust upgrade options out there that you do see appear on heroes, core units, and special forces alike. And right off the bat, we are going to start off with one of the more unique training upgrades, as it is a double-sided card that can only be equipped by force users. And you guessed it, that is going to be the offensive and defensive stance. And depending on which side of the card you have face up, this will allow you to gain either double aim or dodge tokens when you perform the correlating action, but bar you from spending the other. So if you have defensive stance face up and you take a dodge action, you will gain 2 dodge tokens, but be unable to spend aim tokens, so long as that card is face up on that side. And this card is going to rank in at an A tier for me, as this card is going to greatly intensify your use of tokens, but in a very polarizing manner. And while this card may be a no-brainer on a defensive hero like Obi-Wan Kenobi, it will tend to reduce the overall flexibility of other Jedi heroes, and require you as a commander to put more forethought as to when you're going to need those dodge tokens and when you're going to need the aim tokens. And I will say this, I think the defensive stance side of this card is far better than the offensive stance, as Jedi utilize dodge tokens far more than aim tokens. But with that in mind, you can throw this onto Jedi Hero with all red dice pool, such as Anakin Skywalker, and just more or less wholly disregard aim tokens, keep this on defensive stance, and generate more dodge tokens to keep him alive longer. Still, while I think that could be a sound strategy, I don't necessarily think that it is the best strategy. And that's why this card ranks in the A tier and not the S tier, though it certainly is perfect for heroes such as Obi-Wan Kenobi. But with our super special dual-sided force power card out of the way, we're on to some of the more generics that we can see appear on our trooper units, the first of which is Duck and Cover. And when you are defending against a ranged attack, this card is going to allow you to gain a Suppression Token. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the rules of Legion, a Suppression Token is going to give you Cover 1, which will allow you to remove a dice from your opponent's successful attack hits. This card is going to cost 4 points, and will also earn an A tier ranking. It's a really good way to stave off wounds, especially on units that have white armor saves, and heroes with higher courage value who don't really need to worry about taking those suppression tokens on. And there are even some scenarios where heroes have command cards or keywords like Danger Sense, where having something that can generate suppression tokens actually benefits them. 2 great examples of this are someone like Padme or Cad Bane, who have weaker armor saves, a high enough courage to not worry about suppression, and command cards that absorb suppression tokens to grant other benefits. Now, I think this card is a little bit riskier to run on special forces or core units, and it will get too expensive if you try and equip it throughout your army, and I do think it's best suited on certain heroes, or support units who are either going to sit on objectives, or back up your heroes with something like a medical droid. But much like the offensive and defensive stance card, this is not just a flat-out boost. There is a little bit of a monkey's paw here, as taking on suppression tokens can be a dangerous act sometimes. And if you're going into a game blind, perhaps at a tournament or something of the sort, this card may prove to be something of a frivolous investment should you go up against a suppression list. But next up, we are going to have the Endurance training upgrade. And at 6 points, this card very simply allows you to remove 1 suppression token at the end of the activation phase. And unfortunately, this is going to be a C tier card for me simply because of its points cost. It is a very powerful counter to suppression lists, but at 6 points, it's just far too expensive to put onto multiple units. And I think this card really does need to have a broad presence in your force to be effective. Otherwise, your opponent will merely target the nearby unit that does not have endurance. And sure, you could make the argument that this will slot in well on commanders with low courage values, but most commanders have other alternatives to deal with suppression, and I think most of them will have better upgrades to put in this slot, many of which cost less points. So if I saw this card reduced to maybe 4 points, I could see it jumping up to the A range, as you could blanket your core and special forces units with it, but as it stands now, it's just not the best use of points. But that will move us along to the Hunter upgrade card, and again, at 6 points, this card is going to allow you to gain an aim token each time you declare an attack against a wounded trooper unit. And I do want to specify here that a wounded trooper unit means it has to have a wound marker on it. It cannot be an infantry unit missing a model. For example, a B2 battle droid squad that has a B2 that is only at 1 wound will trigger this card, but should that wounded model be killed and no further wound tokens are put onto the units, it will cease to trigger this card and generate that aim token. Nevertheless, Hunter is going to be an S tier card, This one is very popular, especially on heroes and operatives, as they are often the ones who go up against your opponent's big wound models, and having something that just reliably generates aim tokens for you is pretty great to have. Still, 6 points is not cheap, and if you plan on sticking your heroes against enemy core units, this may not be the upgrade for you. On top of that, much like Endurance, it is too expensive to sprinkle throughout your army, and it is somewhat of a gambit putting it onto trooper units, as you're not really sure as to whether they're going to come into combats with any multiple wound models. And that really does make Hunter somewhat of a hero card, but one that can be extremely advantageous when used properly. But next up, we are going to have another aim token generator card that is going to be Offensive Push, and this exhaustible card will give you Tactical 1, which means when you make a standard move, you will also gain an aim token. And at 4 points, this will be ranking in at the B tier for me. It definitely has its advantages, and in certain builds, it can be very useful, most notably those who have a method of automatically recovering, or if you plan on stacking a bunch of exhaustible cards and making recovery actions. But aside from that, you really are more or less just paying 4 points for a free aim token, which can be really good on a unit that's assaulting an enemy, such as a Jedi double moving into melee combats, or a unit of BX droids equipped with vibro swords. But overall, this is a card that I just don't find myself equipping as much as I used to. Still, at just 4 points, this card does have a time and place, and it's not a bad contender for that final afterthought card, should you have 4 points left in your list. But after that, we are going to have Overwatch, which is a 4-point card, giving you Sentinel 1, will increase your standby range up to range 3. And I already know this card is going to be controversial, but I am going to be ranking it at C. It pretty much only has one use in the game, and that's with the clones sharing standby tokens. And yes, it is a pretty amazing card for that scenario, but aside from that, you don't really see it come up ever in the game, as standby is a somewhat rubbish token unless it's being shared to you. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know some people who say this is the only way to run clone troopers. Personally, I don't really run with this gimmick. To me, it just kind of comes off as a strenuous workaround to performing regular actions. But that will move us along to another one of our newer and more unique training upgrades, which is Seize the Initiative. And this is a 5-point card that can only be equipped by commanders or operatives, and is disposable, meaning it can only be used once throughout the course of a match. And burning this card is going to allow that unit to give themselves an order. And that makes this card an easy S tier for me. As I always say, having your commanders and operatives with face-up order tokens and out of your order draw pool is one of the best things you can do for board control. And if you're running a list with multiple commanders or operatives, there's a good chance on a turn when things start to really heat up, you will be playing a 1-pip, which more often than not activates just the hero themselves, leaving the rest of your force kind of in the air in terms of when they're going to activate. So if you're running something like Clone Captain Rex and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Obi-Wan's going to play his 1-pip card, Clone Captain Rex can go ahead and burn that Seize the Initiative, and that will give both of your heroes face-up order tokens, allowing them to start striking first. And I really gotta say, out of all the quote-unquote afterthought upgrades in the game, the ones you put on your list when you have just 5 points left over, I think Seize the Initiative may be the best of them all. But after that, we are going to have Situational Awareness, a very inexpensive 2-point upgrade, and this will just flat out grant you the outmaneuver keyword, meaning your dodges can now cancel critical hits also. And this card is going to be an A from me. Personally, I haven't quite figured out a way to fit this into a lot of my lists, but the fact that it's so inexpensive means that you can dish it out onto almost all of your core units without having any major fiscal impact. But I know this card does fit in very well on units like Tauntauns, and I think in the future, we may see more units that have this as an auto-include. But it does work very well on a list that has a lot of dodge token generation, and I think overall it's just a very affordable, subtle buff that can go a long way in the right scenarios. But being one of the cheapest upgrade cards in the game, it also does work very well as an afterthought card should you only have 2 points left in your list. This could be a good way to spend them by throwing them onto your hero, potentially prolonging their lives. But that's going to move us along to our final training card, which is going to be the Tenacity Upgrade. And this card will allow you to add an additional red dice to your melee pool if your unit has taken any casualties or has at least one wound marker on it. And this card is an easy S tier for me. It just makes so much sense to throw this onto any unit that's going to be going into melee. Red dice are fantastic to have, and on melee heroes like Jedi, you are going to be going into melee and you are going to be receiving wounds by the time you get there. But where this card really shines, in my opinion, is when it's equipped on multi-model units that specialize in melee, such as the BX battle droids, equipped with vibro swords, or Wookiee warriors. Because as the battle goes on and those units start to take casualties, they will begin to lose dice and diminish in offensive capabilities. So having Tenacity on a unit like that is going to help prevent them diminishing in efficiency on the battlefield as time goes on. But there is a third use in which the Tenacity card can also shine, albeit a rather unconventional one, as you can throw this onto traditionally non-melee oriented heroes, which will give them a red dice and make them a little bit more effective to go into melee. And a perfect example of this strategy is with Clone Captain Rex, who usually has 2 red melee dice for his melee attack, accompanied by a surge to crits. And should you find yourself in a situation where Rex is taking a lot of enemy firepower, you could choose to stop engaging in ranged attacks and rush into melee with the nearest enemy units, which will tie them up and prevent other enemy nearby units from attacking you with ranged weapons, which could help keep this hero alive. Again, that's a pretty unconventional way to field this card and equip such a commander, but it does testify to how useful Tenacity can be, and if you really stop and think about this, we have a 4-point card that is giving you a red die to throw into your attack pool, which is pretty insane when you compare it to most other upgrades. But that will cover all of our training upgrade cards to this date, but I want to know in the comments below, what's your favorite training upgrade card? Are there any upgrade cards here that I'm perhaps misjudging? As always, I would like to hear your reasoning behind your claims, and if you guys like this content, consider subscribing to the channel, turning on notifications, hitting that like button, and until next time guys, take care.